With access to the Xbox versions today, it's time to commence part 2 of our Metal Gear Solid Delta Snake Eater coverage. The fact is that Metal Gear Solid Delta's achievements on the visual front impress at least, whether that's on PlayStation 5, PS5 Pro, or even the Xbox Series X release here. The use of Unreal Engine 5's Lumen GI in conjunction with high-resolution materials transforms the jungle setting of the PlayStation 2 original to eye-catching results. But, of course, Delta's frame rate on console hasn't been given quite the same level of care, and we've already seen both base PS5 and PS5 Pro wavering between 40 to 60 FPS in combat scenes especially, with each at times dipping to the 30s. Switching over to the Xbox machines today then, there are two questions left to answer. Firstly, does Series X have a similar issue in holding a stable 60 frames per second? And secondly, what exactly is the state of the game on the 4 teraflop Series S, which only allows for gameplay at 30 FPS with no alternative performance mode? Let's find out. Before we kick off, the game has been updated to patch 1.1.2, but I can confirm that this does nothing for performance on console. Judging by the Steam patch notes, Konami's hotfix only addresses a few outstanding bugs and crashes, rather than aiming to rectify frame rate drops. Just to be certain though, I tested this on Xbox Series X against the older patch 1.1.1, and the result is identical while wading through the game's early areas. It's margin of error stuff at best, with a slight 1 FPS variance here and there. The resolution bounds on Series X, which I'll get to in a moment, also stay the same, and drops to the 30 to 40 FPS range are still just as possible as before. In short then, the 1.1.2 update doesn't have a radical impact on the game's optimization on console, and so the wait goes on to see performance improved here. Focusing on Series X first, in terms of comparisons, we're broadly looking at a match to base PS5. As expected, Series X offers two graphics options, a 60 FPS performance mode and a 30 FPS quality mode, and either way, most settings are identical to PS5's equivalent option. Shadow resolution, foliage and object draw, the volumetric cloud quality during Snake's halo jump, and finally, textures for tree bark, character skin, and the mulch underfoot are matched either side. That being said, you'll notice the game's global illumination, the shading under grass in particular, at times differs between the two. Settings appear to change scene by scene, and so in this shot on the quality mode on both sides, the foliage behind Snake features more prominent ambient shading on base PS5. But then, during gameplay later on, with the 60 FPS performance mode selected, it's Series X that shows that thicker shading beneath grass. It's very curious. Meanwhile, other areas are identical in their lighting setup. More often than not, this parity between PS5 and Series X is the norm, but there are anomalies en route through the jungle, differences that at times change the way light and shade impact the scene, and this does seem to have a bearing on performance, as I'll get to. There's one further change on Series X in terms of image quality. Rolling out the res table, the upper bounds of its dynamic resolution in the 60 FPS performance mode comes in at 1152p on Series X, which is higher than the 1080p peak on base PS5. Interestingly, the Ocelot Duel later on puts each machine at a relatively low GPU load, where it maintains 60 FPS and therefore makes it a great spot to get a best case value. Of course, anytime you see the frame rate going under 60, it means we're bottoming out at that 720p figure on Series X, and much like PS5, that's the full extent of its scalability. Meanwhile, the 30 FPS quality mode has one change compared to PS5 in that Series X has 1152p set as its lower DRS bounds in this case, which is an increase on PS5's own quality mode lower bound setting of 1080p. The visual setup is straightforward then, but how viable is it in targeting 60 FPS? The bottom line is that Series X enjoys a performance lead over both PS5 machines across the early swamp area and a later bridge section, each of which run closer to the 60 FPS mark. The area-by-area tweaks in ambient shading and GI may well be working to Series X's benefit here, not to mention its 12 teraflop power profile being an existing advantage over base PS5's 10 teraflops. Drops into the 40 to 50 FPS range are possible in that opening string of areas, but overall, Series X does ultimately end up giving VRR displays a higher baseline frame rate to work from by a margin of 5 to 6 FPS at times. Plus, combined with the wider 40 to 60 Hz VRR range possible on Xbox systems, it positions Series X as the smoothest way to play on these three consoles. However, there are some exceptions. In one early segment with the hollowed out tree to the left, PS5 enjoys a lead this time, with Series X instead matching the PS5 Pro reading in this case. The second exception is the interior Granini lab area, where PS5 Pro hits the 60 FPS line most consistently of the three, while base PS5 and Series X fluctuate at the 50 to 60 FPS range, though Series X is generally on average at the higher value of those two. Series X's relative performance is higher then, but the reality is that it still has issues. It's worth stressing that segments of MGS Delta will flow at 60 FPS on all three machines with zero issues. The duel with Ocelot flies by at 60 FPS, and likewise, the cave section right after taking on the Pain boss is mostly a flat 60 on all systems. In my experience, these are exceptions to the rule though, and Series X does sadly have entire areas run shy of the mark. The encounter with Ocelot's guards in Razvet, for example, is broadly a 40 to 60 FPS affair, especially if you want to go at it Rambo style, as I did with an automatic rifle. Exploding barrels trigger the most sizable drops, queuing Series X to a similar mid-30s lurch as on base PS5 and PS5 Pro. So there's no Xbox advantage at peak GPU stress points in that sense. And once again, any area with water bodies, especially diving beneath the surface, will have the frame rate go from a mid-40s reading to one in the mid-30s. Put bluntly, there's no flawless 60 FPS on any console, but with a VRR display attached, Series X does stand to smooth out a greater number of drops. One final point, I did notice some odd 100 millisecond hitches while moving around large jungle areas on Series X. It's rare, but kicks in at certain points in the map while facing the Fear, for example. For context, I retested this area on base PS5 and found it's also there in the very same spot, though the spikes are less intrusive at 70 milliseconds. Switching over to Series X's quality mode, the game operates much as it does on base PS5. We get 30 frames per second with similar boosts in shadow and object draw as seen on PS5 using this mode. Unfortunately, the uneven frame pacing at 30 also stays on Series X, meaning judder is evident even when we're technically getting a flat 30 FPS line. Added to that, while a majority of play is usually rock solid at 30 on quality mode, there are drops into the 20s on Series X as well. It's all the same culprits as on PS5 really, with explosive barrels and swimming underwater triggering the more sizable lurches. Not ideal, but it's not too dissimilar to PS5. All of which leads us to Xbox Series S, and let's jump straight to performance testing here. The first point is that there's no graphics mode to toggle, and 30 FPS is all you get, meaning we're effectively lumbered with uneven frame pacing no matter what. It's also clear that Series S has more frequent drops under 30 than Series X's quality mode. Broadly, it hits the mark, and to its credit, most of the early jungle areas, Razvet, and the lab are robustly holding at 30. However, this waterlogged area, for example, tanks Series S into the mid-20s, whereas the other consoles hold a steady, if unevenly frame-paced 30 FPS line in the very same spot. There's no alternative on Series S, sadly, and you'll have to stomach similar mid-20 spells of gameplay during the fight against the Pain 2, another area seemingly bogged down by taxing water rendering. MGS Delta's dense jungle areas flag another cutback on Series S, its resolution range. Series S runs at between 540p to around 1080p, with in-between figures like 684p popping up more typically. As a result, MGS Delta's upscaler doesn't always have sufficient pixel data to work with, and too often the image ends up being noisy or pixelated in motion on Series S. Especially as Snake sneaks through long grass, the image breaks up as each grass blade obstructs and then reveals the scenery ahead, creating this mushy, unstable appearance almost like YouTube compression. The worst case comes about in sub 30 FPS passages, where we're assured to be running at the 540p lower bounds. There simply isn't a consistent or detailed enough pixel structure from one frame to the next for Series S to reconstruct a convincingly stable end result. Now, the second big issue here is the effects quality on Series S, which take a stark cut in resolution. Transparency effects like explosions, muzzle flashes, or particle effects for bullet trails run at a significantly cut back quality level, which in action only adds to the aliasing within the frame. In comparing Series S directly to X, a few other settings take a hit. On the plus side, texture quality is maintained on Series S, and so the soft material on Ocelot's cap and the branding on Snake's cigar are an exact match on both Xboxes. In the depths of the jungle, the density of tall grass is also like for like between the two. Shadow LODs are pruned back too on Series S, causing more pop-in of quality levels as you walk forward, putting it closer to Series X's performance mode. The most obvious downside, though, is that global illumination quality is visibly cut back. Again, this appears to be tweaked per area, where interiors, like the lab, maintain similar indirect shading and light bounce as on Series X, including the unusual flickering artifact across floors. But then there's a big difference in jungle areas, where shading under grass is often removed. In matching shots, the scene appears lighter, brighter as a result on Series S, and it often lacks a convincing sense of depth. The turnout for MGS Delta Snake Eater on Series X echoes the results on base PS5. It's a beautiful rendition of a 2004 classic, but that performance level leaves a lot to be desired at 60 FPS, or 30 FPS for that matter. The saving grace for Series X is that it does at least offer a frame rate lead over Sony's machines in most matching runs through the jungle, barring a few exceptions. Series S, on the other hand, is simply hard to recommend. Even as a 30 FPS only experience, the cutbacks in resolution, effects quality, and ambient occlusion stick out sorely next to the other consoles. As it is in this state, I'd suggest waiting to play it on any of the other consoles or PC if possible. On a more positive note, the Xbox version does include an exclusive minigame in its menus called Snake vs Bomberman. This mode of course mirrors the Ape Escape themed Snake vs Monkey mode on PS5 and PC, where in this case you're tasked with throwing bombs to eliminate all the bomber men in each mission. Konami clearly had a lot of fun putting this one together. It's not just a palette swap either, and there's a few creative twists that tie in with the Bomberman series, making it distinct enough from the Sony version to make it worth seeking out. But that's all from me today. If you did enjoy this video, feel free to like or subscribe, and don't forget to hit that bell for instant notifications as any new video lands. To get a high quality version of this video and many more, check out our Patreon at digitalfoundry.net, and to get in touch directly, you know where to find me. But from me for now, thanks for watching.